It's kind of interesting doing a briefer. It's my 35th this morning. It's not even quite a good. Well, people on the back row don't want to hear anything anyway. They think they're Baptists, or they think they're students, or they think they're teachers who are even worse about it. I came really close this morning. We had 3 rows set up, and at first, the only people sitting on the front row were members of the congregation. So I was really tempted to just take that front row and just move it. Make the second row the front row. As some of you know, this summer I had a chance sort of unexpectedly to teach out of my field over at the college and a course on the sociology of religion. So when Mary came after me wanting titles, at first I said, well, I'm going to do one on the sociology of religion, and then I had to come up with another one, so I just called it the Son of Sociology. Too many horror movies when I was a kid. There was a tremendous amount of information in that class, and some of it I thought really applied to us, and so I went back and looked at that and had a chance to revisit it a little bit, because during the course of the 5-week session, we were going so fast there was just no time to really process anything. I still don't think I've processed it yet. The interesting thing about the study of sociology, the sociology of religion, is it really provides interesting contrasts and even contradictions to a certain extent. On the one hand, I always expect, Unitarian Universalists especially to show up with little bumper stickers that say, "I heart empiricism." We like our hard data. We want verifiable, observable data that anybody can read and get the same thing out of. That's real to a lot of us. But on the other hand, we're talking about religion, and we're talking about human beings, and who's to say that's going to be rational? As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, it's not simply that there's the rational and the irrational. I mean, those two things do exist, but there are other things that are non-rational. There are things you cannot write a formula for. As I've asked somebody once before, well, if everything is scientific, what is the molecular weight of compassion? And they can never tell me that. So there are things in the world that just don't fit into that categories. So that makes doing the sociology, using social science methods, studying religion, which doesn't respond to rationality, an interesting thing to do. It's another realm. I think, reflecting on this, that this might be the dividing line between the social sciences and the humanities. I mean, both of those study human beings, but social sciences study people from the outside in, where the humanities study from the inside out. I might just come down and start shouting, and then it might be easier. If we look, we have our natural science methods. It's used in science, the scientific method. And what happened is, during the Enlightenment, which we all love, people thought, well, what if we applied the same methods to other things besides science, and we developed the social sciences? But then we run into that problem, as the Bard said, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Remembering that prior to the Enlightenment, science was called natural philosophy, and that's what they're meaning. There's more in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your science, we might say. So, to look at this from sociologically speaking, let's start with, how do people come to religion at all? What makes people show up in this group phenomenon known as religion? Well, usually, what happens for most people, according to the data, is that they become socialized as children. They are raised by their parents, and how effective that is depends on the family that's doing it. Whether or not it will take, so to speak. If the family is supportive, then you're more likely to be successful. A warm, close family that socializes their children into religion, that religion will probably take with those kids. Of course, it doesn't always work if the family is oppressive, or, going with the data, if the parents are of a mixed marriage, as in religion, or if there's been marital dissolution, the chances diminish significantly. Well, once you get out of the family, then what happens? Oh, here we go. The historian starts to kick into gear here, because when we talk about change over time, well, people get to be adolescents, and the family isn't running everything. It's not the center of the universe anymore. And what we usually find in adolescence, it's not an on-off switch, but people in their teens will gradually change, usually in a decline in how much they attend church. They come less often. And this is a natural part of it. It's a natural phenomenon. Kids are developing. Anybody who's studied most anything knows this happens. That whether you're reading Piaget or Kohlberg or Fowler, just in stages of development, we hit a point where kids separate, differentiate from their family, and start taking more and more to do with their peers, and they become the primary groups then. So you come out of adolescence and you get into what we now call emerging adults. We've had to come up with a new category because society has changed so much. I mean, 100 years ago, nobody talked about adolescence. You were a child, then boom, you were an adult. And there was nothing in between. It was a pretty short jump you made somewhere between about 12 and 16. Then in the 20th century, we had adolescence, the teen years, which were no longer children, but not yet adults. And now we have emerging adults, which is basically 20-somethings. These are the group that have the lowest attendance. These are the people that tend to drop out. I mean, surprise, surprise, look around in any church and see how many 20-somethings you see. Almost none. Now, there are some churches that have lots and lots of them. They market that. They're really, really saying, we're here to get young people in, and we don't care about anybody else. And so we're going to read the data, and we're going to put into place a marketing plan. And so some of us have a little trouble. Do I want to market my church? Am I selling a product? What are we doing here? After that, when people get into the mature stage, they can go either way. Marriage and family have a lot to do with this. But once you get married and have those kids, there's a couple different ways you can go. Some people say, oh, we need to get our kids to church. This is when we see a lot of people start showing up. It's just that young couple who quit going to church 15 years ago. They meet, they get married, they have kids, and then one day the kid comes home, 6, 7 years old, and says, Mom, are we really going to hell? So where does that come from? Well, the little boy sits next to me on the bus, told me because we didn't go to church we're going to hell. It's like, oh, time to go to church. And actually the rap on Unitarians at one time was that they were children with, or they were atheists with children. That's who showed up in our churches quite frequently. So people will get involved in church, getting their kids to church, being involved in that community, unless, of course, they're involved in what we call competitive parenting. And on Sunday morning, they can't be at church because they've got a soccer match, they've got to get to that dance recital, they've got practice to do, they're in competitive parenting, and they're out there trying to get their kid into some elite school like North Georgia. If they're lucky. If they're lucky, they'll come here and they'll take sociology and history and be really well educated. After that, we get into what I love at the textbook euphemistically called later life. Quite sure what that is? Then we start seeing an increase in attendance. Go to any church, look around at how much either gray hair or no hair you see. And for those who like functionalism as their way of understanding the world, this makes lots of sense. Because as you get older, let's get blunt about this, your friends start to die off. They move into retirement homes, or they decide to go to Florida or some other, crazy place like that. I know people who moved to Florida and go, oh, there's too many old people who move back. But the people you have around you start to dwindle in number. And so you're looking for groups of people you can hang out with. And for a lot of people, when we get towards the end of life, a lot of issues start coming up about, well, what's next? And here, religion gets to be real important for a lot of people. So if we look at actual attendance, we see what's known as the U-curve. You know, it's not a curve like this, it's a curve, you know, here we are, you know, early in life, and then we go, you know, adolescence, emerging adult, comes back up, mature adult, and later life. So we get this odd curve. Of course, now a lot of people don't stay in that church. They swap places. Sometimes it's called conversion, but it's usually not conversion. If you think what conversion is, it's changing completely. And very few people do that. They just kind of swap places. Technically, the word is switching. They just switch from one denomination to another. And why do people do that? Well, there are two great predictors for switching. One is marriage. You marry somebody, and they're real hard-bent on going to their church. You say, okay. Now, I served a little Universalist congregation in eastern North Carolina, and they were sure that's how they lost most of their members. People who raised up in the church, loved the church, married somebody outside of the church who was not flexible. But being Universalists, they were okay. They could adjust, they could adapt, and so they went with their spouse, and the church shrank. The other is education. The more educated you are, the different set of questions you have and assumptions you have in the world. So as people become better educated, they tend to move from one church to another, unless they're already in one of those educational churches, which is not just us. Episcopalians, most Presbyterians, UCC, big time, United Church of Christ. There are a lot of churches that tend to be more metaphoric, more symbolic, more liberal in their understanding, less literalistic. And the more educated you are, the more you are to like those. The less educated, the more you're willing to let somebody tell you what to believe. So that's a fairly high predictor. Okay, so now we got people in. What keeps people there? Where does commitment come from? The book gives us 3 types. So let's look at those. Of course, they have nice terms. It is instrumental, which I thought maybe meant they all played music. Affective, or moral. Instrumental commitment is commitment to the organization itself. It's where people sit down and essentially do a cost-benefit analysis and say, is it worth it for me to get up on Sunday morning and go to a board meeting, go to church, become part of a committee? What is it that brings me to this? Is it worth it? Is the investment worth what I'm going to get out of it? Investment even to the point of sacrifice. And this has a lot to do with retention. Let me read you a phrase out of the textbook. The group that requires little investment and little or no sacrifice is likely to elicit little instrumental commitment. If it's real easy to belong and you don't have to do much and you're not going to have to sacrifice anything, most people will drift off. Because what's the big deal? The higher the commitment demands, the more likely people are to stay. If you really get people to invest in the organization, demand a lot of them, they'll stay. You don't demand much of them, what's the point? Think about that in turnover. Being a minister for the last 12 or so years, I've seen a lot of turnover, and it's always interesting to watch which way they're going. I've seen a lot of people leave UU churches and go to other churches that ask more of them and expected more of them. Because it was too easy to be a UU. They wanted something more demanding that would actually pay off to them more. Other people go the other way. Like, why am I getting up on Sunday morning anyway? Am I going to just go there and hear another talking head? I could stay here in my pajamas, make a nice cup of coffee, read the New York Times, watch the guys on TV and not have to do anything. And then the people who are occasional, sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not. Why are they not here regularly? And this has some really important implications, because the message is, if you don't have a strong investment or you don't ask a lot of people for much, then is it that important? We sometimes don't think about the message of, oh, this is easy, this won't be hard, doesn't take much. Part of what that's saying is, it's no big deal. So do we really want to tell people that? And I think it shows up in implications for recruiting leaders. If it's no big deal, do you really want to take on the commitment to leadership? And we see in this congregation this sort of rotating door of leaders, and same people who have that instrumental commitment, but we're not bringing in other people. Maybe we don't ask enough of people who come here. Maybe we really need to ask for more. Secondly, there's affective, which is commitment to other persons in the group. Almost an emotional dependence. These are your people. And the concept of belonging is usually a prior commitment. That sense of belonging comes first, before the instrumental or the moral. You have a reference group. We can pretty much show up at any UU church in the country and have a good idea of who's going to be there. We don't know their names, but there are certain types and certain ideas that we're going to find there, and that makes a good reference group. We know what we're in for when we go. If we were a sect or a cult, more on that later, what they try to do is get it to be your only reference group. Only be with this group. Don't hang around with those outsiders. It's just us. And if you can get people to think that way, boy, you got them. Because they really are emotionally dependent then. It's one of the reasons so many so-called cults are so successful. They find people who feel alienated, they don't have a group of their own, they don't have a family, they don't have friends. They just have these big targets on their back if you're recruited to a sect or a cult. You can almost measure the vitality of a congregation by the number of small groups that meet regularly. There's all kinds of data out there on that. The problem is if you're affective only, then you're probably not that committed to the organization. And certainly not to the moral level of commitment. You find a lot of people who are there because their friends are there. That's not unusual at all in any church. Now the moral commitment is where it starts getting real interesting. It's your commitment to the norms and values of the group. Your commitment to the meaning system of the religion, to its worldview or ethos. Actually, in the textbook, it says to the rules, regulations, ideas, and mores of the group. Well, what are our rules, regulations, ideas, and mores? 7 principles? You can take 7 principles and stick them in the bylaws of the Ruritan Club, and it would not change it. This is a curious thing. It begs the question, what are they? What are our norms and values of the group? It has been said more than once that our theological diversity is both our greatest asset and our greatest weakness. Even for the people who think we're cults. Funny we should mention, 2 weeks ago, I talked about there were books and all out there that called us cults and things like that. Last week, I was in Tennessee, did exactly the same sermon I did here 2 weeks ago. The guy goes, look what showed up on our shelves. And it's the Zondervan Guide to Cults and Religious Movements. It's the one on Unitarian Universalism. They don't really call us a cult in that sense. But one of the interesting things about it in here is they're saying it's really hard to talk to UUs about what they believe because they don't know. There is no creed. There is no set of beliefs, and so you have to deal with them individually. And here are some ways of doing that. And it goes on. So You know, this is not like real new stuff. This book was written in 1998. It's 14 years old. Remember when everybody was talking about elevator speeches? That was the big thing for a while. Everyone needs to have an elevator speech. Like, if you got on an elevator and somebody saw your pen and they said, what's that? And go, oh, it's Unitarian Universalist pen. And go, oh, Unitarian Universalism, what's that? Or if you're on the elevator, you've only got so many floors to go. It's interesting. One of the people who pushed this was the former president of the UUA, Bill Sinkford. He had a great elevator speech. As a Unitarian Universalist, his elevator speech is, one God, no one left behind. You can do that in one floor. Mine's just a few words longer, but it ends with a comma, because that's the way I think things should end. My elevator speech has always been Unitarian Universalism is part of a 2,000-year-old Jewish reform movement. Comma. Depends on how tall the building is. I can go all the way to the top. But when we did that, everybody came up with their elevator speech, and we never came up with our elevator speech. I had a friend and a congregant in my first congregation who actually had been to Harvard Divinity School, and I can remember saying, I want the laminated wallet card that I can pull out and read to people when they ask what Unitarian Universalism is. And it doesn't exist. This is one of the things that makes it interesting when you start looking at hard, empirical social science data. That hard look can expose your inconsistencies. It can show up the weaknesses. And is that one of ours? Is our opium, to think about Chuck Marx, that it's all about me? Is that our own delusion? That this religion is me and nothing else? Well, there's a couple ways you can look at this. I saw something recently that tickled me. It's something I think was on, actually somebody sent me on Facebook. It says, the nice thing about science is that it's true whether you believe it or not. And I can remember having a near revelation a number of years ago when it struck me one day, and I should have known this my whole life, but it just became real obvious to me, walking down the sidewalk, that the existence of God is not dependent on my beliefs. If God exists, it doesn't make any difference whether I believe it or not. It exists. And vice versa. If there is no God, it won't make any difference whether I believe it or not. So there are things that just, they really are dependent on us and what we think. So religion can't be the opiate of the masses, whatever that opiate is. We see it all the time. Religion can also be a force for change. If we read our history closely, we see it all the time. If one labors on behalf of a moral imperative greater than yourself, then you just might be willing to work against your own financial self-interest. You might be able to work against your own political interests. Well, it would be good for me if we did this, but what about them? You're willing then to take inordinate risks if you think you're working on behalf of something bigger than yourself, more important than yourself. Your religion may demand you to do it. It may support you in that work. The interesting thing is, empirical evidence shows that both options are correct. We can prove both of them with empirical evidence. For some people, religion is the opiate of the masses, and they're part of that mass. For other people, religion is what drives them to do the good work that they do, to take the risks that they do, and be the person they are. Well, we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about religion. So let's not get real rational here. Because it doesn't work. Because we are beyond reason. We're trans